Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode of Networking RX. I am your host, Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate you who have subscribed. When you subscribe, you get every episode as it's released. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. If you are subscribed, refer somebody else. Or if you like this episode, certainly share it with somebody else. Or if you just like the podcast, share it with somebody else. I certainly post this up on social media. That's how the audience grows and builds. Today we're going to talk about networking. We always talk about networking, but we're going to talk about networking from the sense of just how we present ourselves. You know, I've said in the past in prior episodes that networking starts with, well, I should say successful networking starts with a great mindset. After all, from the moment you walk into a room, others are assessing your confidence, your optimism, your level of happiness, and much, much more. And then from this assessment, people determine whether they should know you, like you, and trust you. Knowing that that should inspire you to walk a little taller, smile a little broader, and maybe just have a little more bounce in your step. And all that certainly helps your networking experience. And if you stop and think about it, when you walk into a room or you encounter somebody, or let's say you encounter two people, one who's kind of mopey and the other one who's really confident and energetic, I'm not saying overly gregarious, but just somebody who's got a great presence about them, you're going to opt to want to go towards the person with the present, that presence, that the charisma, the optimism, the happiness. But here's the problem. It's not always easy to flip a mental switch and magically become this confident, awe-inspiring person, right? After all, networking can be uncomfortable, and the mind can be a fickle thing. We have good days and we have bad days. Fortunately, science has given us some clues as to how we can consistently get into the right frame of mind. Again, it's not always just easy to say, okay, I'm going to be happy or I'm going to be confident. And so for years, animal behaviorists have known that certain animals, such as peacocks and felines and chimpanzees, have expressed their power through their posture. Peacocks fan their tails. Felines have been known to maneuver sideways so they look bigger than they actually are, and chimpanzees and other primates will bulge their chests in a show of power. And humans are really no different. We're animals. We have certain open and expressive postures that express power, and more closed, contractive ones that express powerlessness. People who kind of, almost curled up in a ball, or they express themselves as being less powerful, and people who kind of stand and broad shoulders, it's more of a position of power. And for years, researchers believe that when someone feels powerful, in other words, they have an attitude or a mindset of power, that feeling manifests itself in how a person holds their body. That is, the body follows the mind. What we feel in our head, our body is going to project. And that's probably not groundbreaking to anybody here. However, in 2010, there were a group of researchers who challenged this body follows the mind notion, and they made the opposite assertion. They asserted that the mind actually follows the body. In other words, what your body does, your mind will pick up. And so they wanted to test this. And so what they did in a social laboratory experiment, the researchers took 42 volunteers and they randomly assigned each to either a high power or a low power group. And then what they did is they asked the subjects to assume two poses for 1 minute each. 1 minute each. Easy for me to say. The high power subjects took on high power poses, and the low power subjects took on low power poses. And what the poses are they had a number of different poses. One having to do just hands on your hips, standing tall, or kind of sitting in a chair with your feet up on the chair would be a high power pose, and a low power pose would be somebody with their arms crossed, or sitting in a chair with their legs crossed and kind of arms crossed as well, kind of a closed posture. After the test subject completed both poses, researchers then analyzed them in three ways. First was risk-taking. The researchers gave subjects $2 and the choice to keep the money or roll a die, a single dice, with a 50-50 chance of doubling their money or losing it all. The second thing they did was they just gave them a quick little survey. The researchers asked the test subjects to indicate how powerful or in charge they felt. And this was done on a scale of 1 to 4. 1 being don't really feel powerful or in charge, and 4 feeling like, hey, I'm really in charge, I'm really powerful. And then the third thing they did was the researchers took saliva samples, and they actually did this before the experiment, so they had a baseline, and then they took another about 17 minutes after the experiment to measure. What they were trying to measure was the level of testosterone, which is a hormone associated with the feeling of power and control. And they were also measuring their level of cortisol, which is a stress hormone associated with the feeling of being powerlessness, a feeling of powerlessness, I should say, and being challenged. Again, stress. Cortisol kind of measures stress. And when they compared the low power test subjects to the high power test subjects, what the researchers found was this, that the high power subjects, high power pose subjects, in other words, those who took on the high power poses, were more likely to take the gambling risk. They were more likely to try and double the $2 that they had. 86% versus 60%. The high power pose subjects felt significantly more powerful and in charge. On average, they said that they in a scale of 1 to 4, they came out at a 2.57 versus the low power poses, which came out on an average of 1.83. When you start working the statistics of it all, we won't get into it, that's a significant difference. Again, these groups are randomly chosen. The third thing, the testing of the saliva, they found that the high power pose people had an increased level of testosterone and a much lower level of cortisol than in their second sample. The first sample, it was random. They were all basically the same, but the people who took the high power poses, their second testing of their saliva showed that their testosterone was much higher and their cortisol lower, showing that they felt more powerful, they felt more in charge. So what the researchers determined was that a simple power pose was enough to significantly alter this test subject's psychology, their mental feeling of a sense of power. So what the researchers have shown here is that when it comes to a feeling of power, the body may follow the mind. In other words, you can walk into a setting and say, I'm going to be in control, I'm going to be optimistic, and your body will personify those feelings. But they also showed evidence to the contrary, in that the mind, in fact, may follow the body. In other words, you may walk into a setting and might not feel like you're in control, and you can do things with your body that's going to help your mind feel like it's in control. And certainly there are settings where you might not feel in control. Quite honestly, if I walk into a room full of billionaires, I'm not a billionaire, I don't even think I'm a millionaire, but if I walk into a room of billionaires, I'm not going to feel as comfortable as I might walking into a classroom of college students. And that's just, it's just human nature. So it's easy to say, that applying this to us in a networking sense, it's easy to say think confident, optimistic, and powerful thoughts, and that'll come through as to who you are. But again, when you find yourself in those real life situations, it's not always that easy. Likewise, as you stand at networking events or prepare to meet with that local business icon for coffee, there's a lot going on in your mind. So it's not always easy to say, okay, I'm confident, I'm confident. You're worried about what you're going to say. You're worried about lots of other things as opposed to trying to hold that thought about, I'm confident, kind of those affirmations you're going to give yourself so it can come through in your body. But thanks to this research, you don't necessarily have to hold those thoughts. If you want to project a feeling of power and control, follow what this research is saying and assume a high power stance. Stand tall with your hands on your hips, and you might not be able to conjure up thoughts of taking charge, but that feeling will well up inside you merely by taking these high power poses. Your mind can control your body. You can have an attitude of, I'm in charge, but your body can also control your mind. So if you're looking, again, in a networking sense, people want to associate with people who are confident and optimistic. If you want to project that, project it in your posture, in how you look and how you conduct yourself, and that will certainly carry your mind. It'll help bolster your mind. It'll flood your system with testosterone and lower your cortisol, and you'll just feel like you're more confident just by doing that. Just a little tidbit I wanted to share, some research that had come across. I'm actually putting it into an article. Finally, to wrap up, remember AmSpirit Business Connections has a unique franchise opportunity that involves helping small business professionals become more successful through a referral-based networking program. It only involves a couple hours, a few days a week, and would be a great franchise for an attorney, accountant, realtor, business coach, or consultant to add on to what they're already doing and get better networked at the same time. Why just be a renter when you can own the building? Why just be in a business network when you can own your own business network? If you or someone you know would like to learn more, contact me. My email is in the show notes, and it'll be repeated here shortly at the end of the program.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connections. All rights reserved.